After I will. Slide advancer is here.
Hi, everyone. I have the pleasure of starting tonight's session with an announcement. My name is Beth Riven.
Yeah, that's better. Yeah, it was pretty low. It was down pretty low.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to start today's session with an announcement. My name is Beth Riven, and I'm faculty here at the law school and adjunct in global health. And I'd like to announce our summer course in Cambodia. It's a 6-week course, 10 credits. There's a practicum attached to it, and it's an exciting adventure that we're beginning this summer. If you're interested, I have some flyers. There are some flyers around about as well, and I can also send you other materials. In addition, there may be support for graduate students who are interested in not only getting credit, but getting support this summer. So there's the Francis Thomas and Go Global Health scholarships, and there's also a new opportunity from the Human Rights Center that I would be happy to share with you if you're interested. So thanks a lot, and please be in touch with us if you're interested, and take the flyers. I'll send them around.
Great. Thanks, Professor Riven. So we're going to go ahead and get started this evening. Our panel tonight is on unintentional injury accidents. So last week we talked a little bit about intentional injury, which was primarily focused on violence against women and primarily domestic violence. So we're shifting focus a little bit. Our learning objectives for this evening: first, to describe the global burden of health and disability from injury. Second, to describe the risk factors for different types of unintentional injury. Third, to approach interventional approaches to explore, let's say, interventional approaches to accidental and intentional injury using scientific methods, and of course tonight focusing on accidental injury, and to discuss anti-drunk driving interventions as an example of a policy or legal intervention to prevent injury. So we have a great panel this evening. And we introduced Professor WACh in more detail last week, but I will just say that once again, a big thank you to Dr. WACh for helping us put together the panels last week and this week. He is a trauma surgeon, professor of surgery with joint appointments as professor of epidemiology and global health here at the UW. Worked as a surgeon in Ghana for 4 years and directs the Harborview Injury Prevention and Research Center here at UW. We're also being joined by Annie Kunsley. She is an attorney from Columbia, and she is a LLM candidate here at the University of Washington, focusing on sustainable international development. She's an expert in labor law and also and has handled some celebrated cases about forced disappearances and other violence of unionized workers at multinational factories in Columbia. But tonight, she's going to be focused on workplace safety. We're also lucky enough to have with us John Moffitt, who is the Pacific Northwest Regional Administrator for the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. So he's going to bring some perspective from the government side and particularly focused on driving safety, road safety. And we're also joined by Kristen Rivas, who's with Mothers Against Drunk Driving, and she's going to share some great perspective, sort of grassroots level organizing, and some stories for us tonight. So thank you all so much for being with us, and with that I'll turn it over to Dr. WACh.
Thank you. To reiterate a little bit of what we mentioned last week, just on the overall burden of death and suffering from injuries, around 5 million to 6 million people a year die from some type of injury. Whether violence or road traffic crashes or others. That's more than the total number of people who die from HIV, AIDS, TB, and malaria combined. And I don't put that up to be disrespectful of other people's interests or other problems. I put it up just to show that these are all important health problems of huge magnitude. And 90% of all the injury deaths occur in low and middle income countries. It's often thought that injuries are more of a problem in industrialized countries, but in fact the opposite is true. 90% of all injury deaths occur in low and middle income countries, and the rates there are higher. This shows a slide from the World Health Organization looking at rates of death from all injuries combined for regions of the world. And you can see that the lowest It's a placebo, okay. The lowest rates in the world in green are in the highly industrialized countries, the United States, North America, Western Europe, mostly. And rates go higher in Latin America and the Mediterranean region, and even higher in Africa and Southern Asia. And the highest rates in the world for injury are in the low and middle income countries of Eastern Europe, the former Soviet bloc, the Kazakhstan areas and Central and Eastern Europe. So in fact, the highest rates in the world are in the lower income and middle income countries, not in high income countries. Well, what types of injuries are killing people? A variety of things. The biggest single group are road traffic injuries. About a fourth of all the deaths in the, from injury in the world. It's about 1 million, 1.2 million people per year, and that's the main focus of what we'll talk about tonight. Last week we heard about intentional injuries, homicides, suicides, and war, which account for over a fourth of all the injuries put together. And then there's a wide variety of other unintentional, sometimes the word accidental gets used. It's a bit of an older word. It's still understood, but in the injury prevention world, we try to avoid saying the word accident because that gives the sense that they're unavoidable, when in fact they're very avoidable. And so a variety of things: drowning, fires, falls, poisoning. Our next speaker will talk a bit about occupational injuries, and just to point out that those aren't on the slide here because they could be separated out from other data, but they fit into almost all these others. Many deaths of people in road traffic crashes are occupational. Injuries in factories and such might involve falls or fires. So a variety of different mechanisms involve occupational injuries as well. Well, so a huge health problem, and unfortunately tending to get worse, both in absolute and relative terms. This shows ranking injury cause of death rankings for 2004 and then projected for 2030, and lists about 20 of the leading causes by absolute number of deaths. And you can see the three main causes of injury-related deaths all getting worse. Road traffic injuries anticipated to rise, or I should say continue to rise, suicides, and homicides. So, since this is a seminar series on women, adolescents, and children, how does this affect women, adolescents, and children? Well, first looking at gender issues, this is not something obviously specific to women, and in fact, the risk is greater for men. Far more men die from injuries and from road traffic crashes than women. However, given the extent of the problem and how huge the numbers are, it's still a very huge problem for women as well. Nearly 2 million women die each year from some type of injury. And if you look just at road traffic crashes, though the preponderance is men, around 300,000 women die each year globally from road traffic crashes, which is just about the same number as maternal deaths, which receive a lot of attention. I put a range up there because the exact figures vary depending on the estimate over the past couple of years, but certainly in that range, and road traffic crashes being equal. So there's an entire millennium, and appropriately, there's an entire Millennium Development Goal confronting maternal causes, but the same number of women die from road traffic crashes each year. And looking at other specific mechanisms, one mechanism in particular, fires and burns, disproportionately affects women. About 2/3 of all the deaths each year from fires and burns are in women. And then children, there's several different injury mechanisms that specifically affect children. Pedestrian injuries, which are a large component of the road traffic crash problem, especially in low and middle income countries, and drowning, disproportionately affecting children. And adolescents, at increased risk for just about everything, just like here in the United States and most of the world. Who here has teenage kids? I guess I'm betraying my age, eh? And so this, I don't have data specifically on adolescents alone, but this slide, also from the World Health Organization, has two age groups. It shows ranks of death for all types of causes, the 10 leading causes of death for different age groups. And in the middle are older children and younger adolescents, and on the other, in the extreme right side, are the older adolescents and younger working-age adults. So 5 to 14, 15 to 29. And you'll see that throughout the list of 10 is just full of different types of injuries. Road traffic crashes at number 1 for the 15 to 29-year-olds. More road traffic crashes in the children and younger adolescents. Homicide, drowning, suicide, drowning, burns, war, and more burns. So injuries, a huge problem for adolescents. Well, there's often a sense that little can be done about injuries, that they're just accidents, and, well, you have either bad luck or you were careless and you should have been more careful. But in fact, a lot can be done. Injuries can be approached just like any other health problem by understanding the risk factors through scientific research and then addressing these risk factors and evaluating the results to know what really works. And that scientific approach really does work. This shows road traffic crash deaths over the past 50 years for several high-income countries, including the United States. Rates of death have come down to less than half of what they used to be, despite the fact that there's far more use of the roads than in the 1960s. So a lot of prevention measures have brought about these improvements, these decreases in deaths. And we don't need to go into great detail on this, but just to show that there's a lot of science behind this, a lot of understanding of what really does cause crash deaths. And these are often grouped in this matrix of factors. Human factors, that's human behavior, vehicle and equipment factors, like the cars themselves in terms of road safety, and the environment in which the human and the vector or the vehicle interact. And then you can think of that on different time scales. There's several factors that affect whether a crash might happen or not, pre-crash factors. There's things that affect if you have a crash, what's your chance of being injured? That's the crash factors. And things that affect whether you might live or die once you're injured in a crash. So in the pre-crash phase, we have things like drunk driving. Drunk driving significantly increases your risk of having a crash. In the crash phase, we have things like use of seat belts. Seat belts don't stop you from having a crash, but they decrease your chance of having a severe injury if you have one, if you have a crash. And then in the post-crash phase, there's several things, but one of the biggest ones is the trauma care or the emergency medical system in an area. Just to give a few brief examples before going on to the next speakers, from some of my own work in low and middle income countries, just to give a couple of examples from roadway and human factors. A lot of things go into determining whether a road is more likely to be a dangerous road and have a high rate of crashes or not. And there's many small specific features. I'll just show one here. Rigid roadside objects like telephone poles, bridge abutments. And so here are two nearly identical situations. You have the exit for Harborview Medical Center, exit 166 on I-5. And you have the exit in Monterrey, Mexico to the ITESM, Tec de Monterrey School of Medicine, where I've spent a lot of time. And in both cases, you have a barrier that if you hit it going 60 miles an hour, you would have a high chance of dying in your car if you hit that. That chance of death can be decreased by putting an energy-absorbing barrier such as that, which provides ride down and absorbs the kinetic energy that might be imparted to the vehicle and to yourself. The consequences of hitting that energy-absorbing barrier are you have a very high chance of surviving. The consequences of hitting that rigid metal object in Mexico are a very low chance of surviving. Now, of course, things like that might be expensive, but there's a lot of local solutions, such as this in Mexico, where this very dynamic chief of police in Monterrey, Alejandro Herrera, really took safety to heart and really made a big effort to make the roadways of that city safer by very low-cost measures, such as those water-filled barriers, which accomplish more or less the same thing as this energy-absorbing barrier in Seattle, much more expensive. So a lot of road safety is just converting dangerous situations like that to safer situations through a lot of attention to detail. I won't mention much about vehicle design, but human factors. Let's just concentrate on, there's a lot that could be talked about, but one of the biggest ones is drunk driving. And a cornerstone of road safety efforts in industrialized countries is anti-drunk driving work, decreasing the number of drunk drivers on the road, getting people not to accept this as something that's just normal. And that's because drunk driving really does significantly increase your chance of having a crash. This shows on the bottom here the blood alcohol concentration. I know what's the legal limit here in Washington State? Wait, so by 0.08, by the time you've reached 0.08, you're already about twice as likely to have a fatal crash as if you were sober. So the legal limit allows you to be twice as deadly as driving sober. That's the legal limit. And once you get higher than that, you can see by the time you get to 0.1, which was the prior limit up until about 10 or 20 years ago, you're at about 5 times the risk of having a fatal crash. And then by the time you get up to 0.2 or 0.3, you're 20 to 30 times as likely. That's 2,000 to 3,000% higher. So once again, a lot of work in road safety in the United States and other industrialized countries, which John Moffat and Kristen Rivas will talk more about, is trying to address drunk driving. And I will finish up with just a small bit of information. Once again, most of the data we have about drunk driving and the importance of it comes from high-income countries. But it's emerging as a huge problem throughout much of the rest of the world, and as just one look at that, a study carried out by myself and some colleagues in Ghana a while back used methodology similar to NHTSA, that is random roadside breathalyzer surveys, randomly testing drivers on the road for research, not for police enforcement. We tested around 700 drivers, which was and still is the largest such study done, though it's done about 10 or 15 years ago, is still the largest study published in Africa on this. I'd like to acknowledge my colleague here, Godfried Eziama, from the Ghana Police Service, and though I like to think I'm unique being a surgeon with public health training, he takes it even further, being a policeman with an MPH degree. And you see us before the start of the research testing out the handheld breathalyzers, making sure they are well calibrated. Neither of us was driving. The results were frightening. Looking at the higher cutoff blood alcohol concentration of greater than 0.1, 11% of drivers in Ghana were drunk at peak times, weekend nights, which is about 5 times higher than the current rate in the United States. And even more frightening, if you looked at 24-hour, 7-day-a-week averages, 3% of bus drivers and 8% of truck drivers were drunk. And that probably explains why the roadways of Africa are littered with things like this. So, in summary, for drunk driving in particular, which our last 2 speakers will focus on in more detail, there's many effective solutions, things like laws determining the blood alcohol concentration that counts for being drunk, methods of enforcement, and in particular one kind called checkpoints, where the police can stop, set up roadblocks and breathalyze people. When we wrap up the session, I'd like us to discuss how much should that be promoted globally. It's a very effective method. That is, the police can set up checkpoints wherever they want and breathalyze whomever they want. It's very, very effective. Is that something that should be promoted in the United States, in every state, which it's not? Should be promoted globally. It's got 2 sides to the coin, and we'll be talking about that. So, and then just to summarize, injury prevention as a whole has many very effective interventions. These are minimally applied globally, especially in low and middle income countries. So thank you for your attention. I'd like to turn it over to our next speaker. Oh, what's up? All right. What did I do? All right.
Oh, no. Oh, sorry, it is the other one.
Hi, well, they asked me to talk a little bit about occupational or labor injuries in women in Colombia. Why? Well, I'm a labor attorney and I have been working for more than 10 years, usually in mines, managing everything related with workers and with women. So it's more like I have a background there than that is something very legal. So what happened? In Colombia, we have like a very, very broad legislation concerning everything related with occupational risk injuries and like that. Actually, it's a constitutional right that you have to be healthy. So you can have and to have a lot of actions regarding that kind of stuff. And we have a lot of statutes and a lot of stuff. What happened? The real problem that we have is that even though we have even a better legislation than in the United States and than in Europe, we have a problem of enforcement. Why? Because we have very, very big companies that have a lot of money and that they can really do whatever they need in order to protect their workers. And we also have small companies and informal companies that are not even allowed to do it. So that's when we begin to see when women have injuries and when they don't. So usually, well, this is a data, it's in Spanish, but I will translate it because it's the only source I found. So the thing is that you have to divide. For example, in the big companies, mine companies, stuff like that, you have a percentage of 90% of men and only a 10% of women. So that's why you won't find never like a high percentage of women injuries. And even though if you make like, I don't know, a comparison, you will find that women are so responsible that they don't have accidents. You only find accidents when you have men. Why? Because usually men arrive drunk. They begin to earn a lot of money when the mine company arrives to the place where they were used to, I don't know, they were used to earn like, I don't know, $30 per month. And then they just began to earn $2,000 per month. So they try to spend that money with women, playing, in drinks. So we have a lot of injuries. They fight between them. And what happened with women? Women, usually, they are like very low profile. They have a lot of kids in charge. So they really need the job. They fight very, very hard in order to achieve like their goal and to find like a good job. And the mine is the only opportunity they really have. So once they have the job, they are very responsible. And of course they cannot drink because they have kids. So it's like we don't have like any injuries in that kind of multinationals. That's why the data usually shows that women are okay. What happened? Like in smaller companies or informal companies is where we really have all the injuries in women. So we have to make another difference here, and is related with social class. Colombia is a developing country, and it has like very huge differences still in social classes, in social positions. So women that are high educated and that have, I don't know, that have like, they belong to a circle, they of course can achieve like and have better jobs. And usually the job is in a desk. So what injuries they may have? Maybe some occupational illness related with the hand or stuff like that, maybe the back. But usually you cannot find that kind of stuff. What happened with the other women? Because they really need like to have strong jobs, very tough, so that's where we really find that kind of injuries. For example, where you can find like a huge percentage of women working in the flowers, one, and as domestic workers. In Colombia, not as is different than in the United States. Domestic workers is a form of job, and is highly regulated. It's almost as than having the same job that if you're working for a company. So you have the same rights. The other stuff is how to enforce that kind of rights that they have. What happened with that woman? Is the same stuff. The risk and the injuries are related with their families because they are women that works a lot. They have 2 or 3 jobs. They have kids. They have like no support of a man. So they arrive like at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning to the flowers spot, and they work until, I don't know, until noon. After that, they have to stop and they have to work again. So there is where we really can find that kind of injuries in women. And with the maids, because they usually get caught, they have like back problems, and with all the informal stuff. That's where you can find women, and in the streets, in street vending. So in Colombia, it's like, okay, you have to, for knowing occupational injuries by gender, you have to split like, okay, you are in a big company or you're in a like small company. In a big company, even though you have injuries, you're more protected because you have an insurance. It's mandatory to have it. And even though if you're a woman, you have less injuries, one, because you're more responsible, and two, because it's like a machista society still. So women are in a desk, and men are like working with like heavy stuff. And if you are in a small company, of course, you will have like more injuries because you don't have the money for paying everything related with occupational health, and because, of course, you have like other kind of issues. And related with social position, because if you belong to a higher social position, you can have like good jobs, and if you don't, you have like another kind of jobs, informal jobs, or even jobs that are not regulated. So that's a little bit like how are the injuries in women. But still, they are more in men. I really made that research, really high research, and like the 90% of the accidents are in men, not in women. So I don't know if you have some questions. Okay.
While you're working on that, I'm going to go ahead and begin, if I may. I'm John Moffett. I am the Regional Administrator for the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. And probably the only place any of you would have heard of that is if you bought a new car and you saw a 5-star safety rating on the car. Or perhaps you've been driving and you've seen a click it or ticket campaign encouraging people to wear seatbelts. How many recognize that slogan, click it or ticket? Okay. That's one of our programs. But actually, we're a component of the United States Department of Transportation. And the reason that we're working on automobile accidents is we're trying to increase the ability of people to move freely about our society and drive and do their business without getting killed. And the reason that we are concentrating on that is that the United States really has prospered. And the reason that the United States has such a wealthy economy is the impact of transportation. If you look at the limits of what a farmer can do and how far they can go to sell their crop, you'd start to understand why road building in the United States was driven by farmers who wanted good farm-to-market roadways. And so if you put food on a cart and drive it to the market, you're limited to probably about a day's journey from your home. The ability to move freely over a good roadway for even 20 miles vastly increases the market and the ability of you to sell your products. So the prosperity of the United States is very much tied to transportation. And we would really like our roads to be as safe as aviation. How many of you feel that you can jump in your car and drive to your destination safely? Okay, most of you. How many are pretty confident that if you get on an airplane that it's going to land without crashing? Okay, most of us. You know, and so when we look at complex transportation things like flying, last year there were like 2,600,000 flights in the world, and there were not one person killed in commercial aviation accidents. So flying in jet airplanes is essentially the safe. It's probably safer than sitting in this room in the Cascadia subduction zone. So, you know, to me, the prosperity of the country and the world really depends on transportation. And if you look at the modern prosperity of China and other places, it's largely due to transportation and the ability to send goods across the seas in containers. So that innovation has helped spread prosperity to a lot of developing countries in the world. So we're shortening distances, we're speeding up, and okay, there is the problem. So if you fall off a cart that's moving at a walking pace, what happens? Doctor, how bad of an injury can you get for falling off that? Very, very minor injuries. If you slam into that concrete barrier in Monterey, you're going to suffer a very severe injury, even if you're going only 30 or 40 miles an hour, roughly 50 kilometers. That's what we see as the threshold where people start to die in traffic accidents. So high speed is a result in The other thing that you see as people begin to drive around the world is that this is a very complex skill. So driving is not a simple thing, especially if you're used to using animal power to move your crops or like ride a horse or ride on a cart. You know, most horses are not stupid enough to walk into a hole or drive. You know, a horse never runs into a pole. So you don't actually need the protective thing on a pole if you're riding a horse, because the horse says, well, I'm not going to be stupid enough to run into that, so it turns away. If you're drunk, your horse will take you home. You get on the horse may not put you to bed, but it'll go and you can fall in the stall. So, you know, as people move from animal power to vehicle power and start to have the experience of driving, the car says, you want to drive into the wall? Fine with me. Okay? You're too drunk to drive? Doesn't matter. You know, if you can get in the car, it's a lot easier to sit in a car than it is to mount an animal. So, you know, as we pave roads, we get cars moving faster, we start to see more and more problems. The other thing that happens concurrently with this is if you're walking in an area that does not have any roadways and a nice new paved path is built between two places you want to go and you're happening to ride a bicycle, what are you going to do? Are you going to ride on the new paved roadway that's much easier than the old broken down path? Are you going to tend to walk on that because it's flatter? Maybe you can pull a hand truck behind you. So people are going to not only drive and drive quickly, but they're also going to be driving in an area that's also driving the pedestrians and bringing people onto the paths. And so over time, conflict is inevitable. And generally speaking, the easiest way to connect towns is have the roads go right into the core of the town. So you have problems of the people, the cars, the fast-moving objects. The other thing that we see is people who are inside a car lose track of how fast they're going. So if you're driving in a nice modern car with an air conditioner, it's quiet or it's loud with your stereo or whatever, you're sort of in this insulated bubble and you lose track of the fact that you're hurtling through space. So if I were to spin you in a circle as fast as I can, we probably could not get you up above about 5 miles an hour, but you would not want me to slam you into a wall at the end of that. But when you're going 60 miles an hour out on I-5, you're moving just incomparably faster than that. And if you slam into something, you're going to be very seriously hurt. So Dr. WACh put up the display of the Haddon matrix, which is the way the United States government approaches and actually has informed the injury prevention movement across the world. And the Haddon matrix uses before, during, and after the crash, the vehicle, the environment, and the driver. And when we look at that, the one thing we immediately learn is alcohol is the issue. Actually, I think that Annie talked about men drinking alcohol is the issue. That's certainly true in the United States. And you know, the experience of the world is largely a male problem, and it's actually a younger male problem. When I look at the experience in the United States, we believe that checkpoints, testing drivers frequently so that we can have them confront the idea that if they're out on the road, they may encounter somebody that will test them for alcohol, and if they're a DUI, that they're going to, driving under the influence, they're going to arrest them. The United States has dabbled in this, but many of the states, particularly in this part of the country, don't allow that. In states in the country where it's used fairly frequently, we've seen it's a powerful force for controlling this bad behavior. But when you compare what Australia has done, it's astounding. Dr. WACh put up a trend line for traffic fatalities over the last 40 years around the world. And if you looked at the 3 lines on there, Australia was the one that showed by far the biggest difference. And what's interesting is that where checkpoints in the United States might be screening a few hundred people occasionally, by that I mean once or twice a month, the Australians in the process of a single year will screen over 4 million drivers out of a population of about 6 million. So 2/3 of the population will encounter a checkpoint in any year. And the thing that amazed me when I was in Australia is that if a police car comes along, it goes through the checkpoint too. And when I was in Sydney, they actually arrested a police officer who was driving his police car as a DUI. So to me, they're serious about this and really addressing the problem. The reality in the I had a dose of this from one of our colleagues when we were talking about getting ready for this, is the reality in the developing world is that people may not be enthused about encountering yet more police checkpoints of police who are of questionable quality. And I guess I'd ask you, even here in Washington State, would you be enthused about the idea of being stopped more frequently at police checkpoints when you're not doing anything wrong for the good of society? I guess I can't say that that I'm thrilled with that concept. So it's a challenge. Annie mentioned in Colombia that they've enacted good laws. The difficulty is that when you put a new law into place, the law has to be enforced and actively used in order to actually gain the societal improvement. So passing a law in itself may make the legislators feel better. They can tell society that they've done something. But if the police don't turn around and actually turn that into enforcement, you have no gain. So to me, when I look at what's happened in the United States, the thing that excites me is that we've not only enacted good drunk driving laws, but we are actually enforcing them vigorously, not at the Australian level, sadly, but we are taking serious action. And this is not something that would normally occur. This happened for specific reasons. And I'm old enough to have watched the whole process. So it was interesting that I think the thing that drove the United States is actually citizen involvement with a particular organization, and that's MAD, Mothers Against Drunk Driving. And what they did was that they shamed, urged, and yelled at the legislators until they passed effective drunk driving laws. But the thing that I think distinguishes what MAD has achieved over the years is that they then sat in courtrooms, and they sat in the offices of the police chiefs, and they talked in their communities about the need for them to not just talk about it, but you cops go out and find the drunk drivers, and you judges, we're going to be sitting in your court when these people are in your court, and you've got to convict them if they're guilty. Don't let them off easy. And so to me, our next speaker is going to be talking about what MAD has done, but from the U.S. government viewpoint, I think that the exciting thing about what MAD did was they took this policy, got it enacted, but then made it enforced. So that's the exciting thing where I see talk turned into practice. So I'm going to turn it over to my colleague from MAD.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Well, I'm honored to be standing here speaking to you on behalf of Mothers Against Drunk Driving tonight, and I appreciate your presence here with me. Get started. I think it's important to know what MAD's mission is. The mission of Mothers Against Drunk Driving is, of course, to stop drunk driving, support the victims of this violent crime, and prevent underage drinking. Most people might not know that that's a huge mission and goal for MAD, is to prevent underage drinking specifically. Many people, of course, recognize the name of MAD, but they might not recognize the name of the woman who started it. In 1980, Candy Lightner made a pledge in her deceased daughter's bedroom, who had been walking across the street on her way to a church event. She was 13 years old, and a repeat offender hit her while she was walking across the street, knocked her clean out of her shoes to where she landed on the other side of the street. Candy Lightner made a decision that she would not let her daughter's death go in vain, that she would do something about the outrage of drunk drivers. And in 1980, without any money, no offices, no clout, only a handful of grieving mothers, and a picture of a pretty 13-year-old girl who had died, they started one of the greatest movements that this country, and in fact the world, has ever seen. They've saved so many lives. How did they do it? Because with broken hearts and meager beginnings, the early leaders of MAD ignited a movement where they brought cold, hard statistics and data to life. They would go, as John said, to courtrooms. They would go to legislative movements, and they would hold up pictures of their loved ones, and they would hold up posters, and they would speak on their loved ones' behalf, and they would share every nuance of their lives. And they said, this is something that can't be ignored. You have to do something about it, and it's worth it. Mothers Against Drunk Driving, their activism, the awareness that they've promoted, has been responsible for saving over 300,000 lives in their past 33 years. And of course, that number is still climbing. Their goals and strategies would be to involve the community in their capacity to impact. They target drunk driving, underage drinking, and victim services. They use community awareness and involvement, like your participation here tonight in this discussion. They involve corporate sponsors. Not many people might know that the NFL, Coca-Cola, State Farm Insurance, I believe it's State Farm, is that right? Yeah. Big supporters of MAD. And law enforcement, we work hand in hand with them. The judiciary system and, of course, government is what makes us have the capacity to impact. In our campaign to eliminate drunk driving, MAD, of course, wants us to support our heroes. We endorse sobriety checkpoints. We support requiring ignition interlock devices for all drunk drivers, including first-time offenders. That's a recent law that was passed here in the state of Washington that we're so thankful for, because it makes sense to help prevent that violent crime as soon as you can. And, of course, to secure the future. Support the development of technology that can help a car fail to operate if the driver is drunk. So we want to support that. Underage drinking. MAD really has understood through research the effect, what can make the most significant difference in making sure that underage children are not drinking is by using the power of parents, the influence of them to influence their own family. So we support, of course, the minimum age drinking law. That's something that MAD is responsible to have been getting passed in all 50 states. Teen alcohol abuse, of course, kills at least 6,000 a year. And we discourage adults from providing alcohol to minors. That's some of the legislation that MAD, of course, is active in passing. Our goal was to reduce the number of underage drinkers by 5% in 5 years. And from 2008 to 2011, we've seen that fall significantly due to our campaigns. And MAD is responsible for supporting one victim every 8 minutes completely free of charge, providing different things, of course, such as emotional support, accompanying victims and survivors to court, and as you can see, many other things. And tonight I wanted to share with you my story of how it is that I became involved with this wonderful organization. I wish I could tell you that I just chose to do it because I thought it was a great cause and that it was something that it wasn't fate and destiny that kind of like led me to it. I was a freshman in college from actually the year of when I first became to get involved with MAD. And the reason was, well, just like any other person in college, hopefully not too much stress, life was going along good. I promise that that is water in those jugs. In Florida, we have to stay hydrated. That's where I'm from, especially when you're playing out in the sun. But I had safe fun with my friends. And unfortunately, on March 6th of 2005, I was awoken by my father in the middle of the night when I was visiting from college home for a weekend. And my father woke me up, and he said that me and my brother had to come down to the living room because there was an important family meeting that we needed to have. And he proceeded to tell us that my sister had gotten in an accident the night before and that she hadn't made it. And then we turned on the news and we watched what happened. News reporters were covering the story of my sister's death, which, as you can see, my sister and I were very close. She was 15 months older than I. And we shared all of our school days. This came as quite a shock. The person responsible for my sister's death, the drunk driver, his name is Stephen Michael Johnson. He was 28 years old. He was a repeat offender. He actually had 14 DUIs. His license had been revoked. And he had driven a car into somebody else's house 6 months earlier, almost killed them. The arresting officers on that morning when I found out about my sister's death and I saw the news clip, the arresting officers of Stephen Michael Johnson said, "We were waiting for him to kill somebody so we could take him off the streets because the laws weren't tight enough to keep him in jail earlier." Yeah. So that's Bethany, my sister, 19 years old. Isn't she beautiful? Worked at Starbucks. I got married in my senior year of college. And that's me at my sister's gravesite, because she wasn't there to be with me on my special day. And a year later, I ended up in a wheelchair. That's me on my 1-year anniversary of my wedding. And I'll tell you what happened. In 1 month to the day after I got married, I was folding laundry in a campus dormitory. And I started to experience blurred and double vision. I had a mental fog that came over me. I heard ringing in my ears. I couldn't think to speak. My tongue felt swollen and numb. And my eyes went cross-eyed. My eyesight started to fade completely. My hearing, my ability to speak until I lost consciousness. And when I came to, I was convulsing for hours in an emergency room. Doctors ran a bunch of tests, but they told me they had no idea what was going on with me. Eventually, my symptoms died down, and they released me saying that it could be stress. A wedding was stressful. They knew that my sister had died a few years earlier, and my parents were on the brink of divorce in the wake of my sister's death and the foreclosure of their home in that 2008 fiasco. Sorry. And I was like, stress? They said, it's kind of like panic attacks. This might be that. I kind of wiped it away as if it was a bad dream, but the next day, I had the same thing happen, these same symptoms, and then 3 more times that week. And then it started happening up to 3 times a day. I remember the day 3 weeks later from the first time my symptoms started when my husband and I had broke down and gotten me to get a seizure helmet. I was holding a 4-prong cane, and I had a safety pinned note to my chest that had my emergency contact information and my medical information of what to do if they found me on the way to and from one of my classes having seizures, what to do. And I decided at that moment when I was looking in the mirror wearing all those things that I couldn't do it anymore, that I was going to have to drop out of college 4 months away from graduating. And that wasn't even the low point. Things got worse. I started having these grand mal seizures up to 9 times a day, and they didn't respond to normal medication. A shot of Ativan could usually help somebody stop a grand mal seizure dead in its tracks. They could give me 3, and I would keep seizing for hours. I became a patient of the Mayo Clinic. I would go for the first week out of every month for over a year. Was poked and prodded like a guinea pig. In the end, to be officially diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder from complicated grief. I was also given the diagnosis of major depressive disorder and something called conversion disorder, with the primary symptom being pseudo-seizures. Basically what happened is the doctor said that my body had been converting anger and depression and grief and worry, these kinds of things, into psychosomatic symptoms. And that I shouldn't feel guilty that you couldn't stop it or prevent it like a sneeze. They happened every time I was in a room with any kind of fluorescent lighting, every time I saw something zoom in or out, every time I took a few steps backwards, I was in a car and it reversed, somebody moved my wheelchair too quickly, I would have a seizure. Luckily, the Mayo Clinic recommended me, after tons of different kinds of treatment, to try hypnotherapy, and I had 1 session and all of my symptoms stopped. That's why I became a hypnotherapist. But I just want to let you know how it is that I became well here today. So you don't have to be all sad. The point of my story that I wanted to share with you all here today is that the numbers that you see, like for instance in the state of Washington in 2011, there were about 10,000 deaths from drunk driving. And it's not just those people that die. It's not just those people that are affected. It's their friends, it's their family, it's their coworkers. And it doesn't just happen at that moment. The impact can last forever. And there's something that needs to be done about it. Thank you guys for your time.
Kristen, thank you so much for coming and telling your story. Thank you very, very much. So there's a lot that we could talk about. I imagine people in the audience have some questions. Since we have a bit of time, what I'd like to do is perhaps get a contentious debate going. Since we're in the law school especially. Drunk driving, a huge problem. Well, injuries, a huge problem. Occupational injuries, a problem. Road safety, a problem. But let's and we'll talk about other things, but let's, for about maybe 5 or 10 minutes, let me hear your viewpoints on this topic, this issue. When we talk about drunk driving, and we've heard about checkpoints, what distinguishes checkpoints from other type of enforcement is that in almost every country, if a driver looks very drunk, weaving, driving on the road, looking drunk, almost everywhere the police could arrest that person. Whether they do or not is another issue, but they can. A checkpoint, and that's a moderately effective method of combating drunk driving. Far more effective is checkpoints where the police set up a barrier and breathalyze everyone going by. And publicize it and let it be known that if you're out on the road, you're likely to encounter a checkpoint and you'll be breathalyzed. And so I think in the legal term, I'm not a lawyer, that's probable cause. If you're weaving in your car, the police has probable cause to pull you over. If you're at a checkpoint, you're being screened just for being on the road. There's no probable cause. It's far more effective to do the latter. You saw the data that John mentioned from Australia, dramatic improvements in a very high alcohol-using society, but they're managing to disconnect alcohol use from drunk driving, mostly through checkpoints. So, you're on the roadway of Washington State, and the police set up a checkpoint and breathalyze you for being on the road. Is that a good idea? We don't do that in Washington State. I think, about 15 U.S. states allow that? 20 U.S. states? Yeah. And then many other countries. Or you're on the roadway of Ghana or Kenya, and the police have a checkpoint and breathalyze you, or examine you or just through clinical observation see if you might be drunk. How many people think that's a good idea? Lots of hands. But how many people think that's a bad idea? How many people would not want a policeman in Ghana breathalyzing you? Okay. Yeah, well. Yeah, I don't know. I'm kind of conflicted on this myself. I'm sold on checkpoints. I think it's a good idea, and I recommend it to the Ghana government when I'm there working with them. But, yeah, no doubt there's complicated issues either way. But let's hear a few points on this.
I have a question. So is it actually, so the fear of the checkpoint is the most effective part?
Yeah.
Is it like,
Mm-hmm.
There's movement of people. They're not easy to do.
Yeah.
And also, it doesn't, a lot of these throughout your life during a month.
Mm.
If they're occasional, but people's behavior in a positive way, like what is the...
I think John would know the data more on this. I think
what they're striving to do with checkpoints generally is to create a condition called general deterrence, which is the understanding that you probably won't run into a checkpoint on this trip, but you could. And so therefore I probably shouldn't drive drunk tonight. So they want you to be thinking before you make a trip. And that affects the people who are getting ready to go out, the whole community. So your idea is to influence the behavior of the entire community to be more careful. The problem is some of the people who have severe alcohol habits and stuff are going to say, well, I've never driven sober before. I can't start tonight. So, in terms of a specific response to that person, this is not very effective, but it does help deter this behavior in general, and that's where the safety comes.
Lots of hands. I don't know where to begin. So.
You know, it occurs to me that one of the roles of MAD is to police the police. And so, you know, I could see volunteers in Brazil accompanying the police, but standing off just to see that they behave themselves. You just let a person who is obviously intoxicated, a drunk, drive through your checkpoint. And why was that? And maybe not asking them, but asking their superior. Or just saying in public, you know, that our police, it's laughable. The police are just using this to line their pockets with money. So, you know, to me, one of the things that I think the citizen activists here have made is the ability to sort of watch the government. Probably, if most of you who are visiting the United States as students and things, probably shocked at how much of a beating we in the government take from our citizens about how good we're doing our job. You know, it's routine for me to have people saying, you ought to be doing this or that, or what you're doing now is wrong. And I think that's one of the strengths of our government is people can complain and really are heard.
That year of 2005, my mother and I, every time there was a point to be offered in Orlando, thank you, we were there. It's called Walking the Line, where as cars are kind of backed up, waiting to be checked out really by the police, a lot of times maybe some people would be unaware of what this was, what's going on, is there a traffic accident up ahead, and we would have our MAD representation there, like pins or posters or things like that. And once they heard what this was about, that we're just making sure that you're driving on a safe road tonight, nobody complained. You know what I mean? People were happy to wait. And at least in Florida, where I was from, there, I know that this is a different kind of country than Brazil and other places in the world, but there wasn't ever any complaints of abuse of power from the police. But MAD, of course, made sure that we were there and that they were doing their job, and the police enforcement were always very thankful for that.
In my country, in Colombia, the police is really corrupted, really. So they really can give you $3 and they will say, okay, goodbye. But what the government did is like they made like a figure called the road angel, guardian angel. So when you're drunk, you can call to a phone number from the state and you say, okay, I need an angel, guardian angel, and you tell the place where you are, and there is a place, a person that just drive your car until you are safe. And that has diminished like a lot the accidents. Because it's so corrupted that they had to do something really like different.
Yes.
So we have, sorry, I am eating and that does not. Are actually out just making. So we do.
One of the problems with, at that stage, you're kind of at a risk point because the prevention's already failed. The person's intoxicated, and they're planning to drive. And the secondary problem for that is one of the effects of alcohol is that it makes their driving worse, but it also makes their judgment worse. So you're making a complex thing where they're trying to balance, do I spend this money for a taxi cab or can I just jump in my car at a time when their judgment is really impaired as well.
I think you've had your hand up the longest. Yeah. Interesting question, because a hallmark in the progress towards decreasing drunk driving, which got passed here in the United States about 30, 40 years ago, is the concept of a per se law, which means that you are breaking the law if you drive drunk, even if you haven't done it, even if you're not weaving, even if you're not hitting something. The act of driving drunk itself is illegal. And so that's called a per se law. And all states in the United States and almost every industrialized country has a per se law and a per se limit defined as, in Washington State, you are breaking the law if you drive at higher than 0.08 grams per cent. And prior to, like, I don't know, the 1950s or 60s, most laws in the United States were just, you can't drive drunk if you're too drunk to drive safely. And so that's very hard to enforce, and the per se laws are much more enforceable. And gradually, countries are coming along and passing them. One of the things I'm very proud about is our drunk driving study in Ghana in the late 1990s. Actually, it was Godfried, the police doctor, presented that data to the Ghana Parliament and got a per se law passed. The Ghana laws for drunk driving hadn't been changed since the 1950 British colonial statutes, which were just, if you're too drunk to drive safely, it's a crime. You know, if you're driving drunk. But that was the first per se limit ever passed in Ghana. And I think many African countries are coming along now. And I don't actually know the status, but there's still a lot of countries without per se limits. Now, that's a legal statute, and enforcement is a whole other issue. And it's still a long, long way to go for most developing countries. As I understand it, and John can tell much more about this, it's fairly random. You don't want people to know where it's going to be. And, yeah, it could be high, high versus low income, but there's a lot of roads where everyone shares them. And so, John, do you want to handle that about the location?
I have to correct you. It's actually the opposite. We want people to know where they are because we're actually not trying to find any one individual. We're trying to persuade people so that they actually publish usually the night or two before that they're going to be out there, they're going to be in these specific locations, that they're going to affect you on your trip, and so publicity is a big part of it. And I think most governments in the U.S. are going to be sensitive to not mistreating any part of the population and making sure that, because this is not something that is in one socioeconomic class, it's across the full spectrum. And I was formerly a police officer myself, and I saw on occasion people who were very prominent, including a U.S. senator, in my drunk driving lab taking a breath test. So, it's not something that just one class of the society is involved in. So it's really trying to get them in large locations. The Australians essentially try to make it so that on any trip you can anticipate you'll bump into them. And that's the place where this has really achieved its major goal. Because the Australians would never give us thought to driving drunk anymore. It's just, you'd be insane, because they think you're going to get caught. And so they don't do it. It's really fairly simple. Okay. You have enough money to pay for the University of Washington? So I'm only asking that because that's what the politicians are going to ask, is that would be interesting to do but very expensive. So Mad mentioned one other thing. Charlie, may I draw attention to the Ignition Interlock program. So Washington State has made an extensive investment in putting an ignition interlock device, which requires you to take a breath test before you can drive if you've been arrested for drunk driving. So from now on, you will have to have accompanying you in your car. You turn the key on, but you also have to test your breath before you can drive. And to me, when I'm balancing the economy and why should we be affecting every honest, well-behaved citizen because of the misbehavior of some, would be a good question. And then why don't we treat the people who really have demonstrated that they are criminally driving this way a lot harder instead of treating all the innocent people a lot harder? So I am really excited about what Washington State has done. There's about 37,000 of these breath testing instruments now in the cars of people who have historically driven drunk. And to me, that's a really exciting but economical approach because the people who are the violators actually pay their own costs of that. So to me, when I look at public policy, this is maybe a more acceptable alternative and really focuses on the people who have the problem.
I guess if and when that ever arrives, it sounds like it's going to be a good idea, but it seems to me to be pretty far off, even here in high-income countries, and then never mind, the low and middle-income countries. But is that something you're working on? Yeah. Well, oh. What's the price? Yeah, yeah. So, hopefully we'll see that soon and make it globally applicable, like cell phones. Good question. I don't know the answer to the, are they allowed to check for anything else?
I think that your concerns are the same concerns that a lot of citizens have, is like, yeah, I'm okay with being checked if I'm drunk, but I don't really want the scope of this thing to be like you're looking through my entire car or ask me where I'm going. It's none of your business, And so I think the intrusiveness of that needs to be controlled. The police need to do certain things to protect themselves. But, you do get into a transaction with the cops, which I think a lot of people are not really overly eager to do. And so, to me, the ignition interlock is a better way. The technology currently exists to be able to have your car know that you're drunk when you get in it. So through transdermal, through your hands on the steering wheel, or by smelling your breath as you're sitting there, something on your, equivalent of your garage door opener on your visor can sense your breath is full of alcohol. So the technology exists for new cars, but the cost of doing that is high. But really, by putting a simple ignition interlock in the car of the offenders, we really might be able to do wonderful things about controlling the behavior of the people who are actually engaged in it.
Other questions? Yes. Okay, all right. All right, I think someone had over here, I think you had your hand up for a while, yeah.
Exactly understood your question. Could you please clarify it for me? What? Yeah. Minimum drinking. Hmm? You're actually exactly right, because the reason why I said that we support the minimum drinking age of 21 is the fact that, Matt, we have so many resources, we have so much of a budget. So the reason when we look through research and statistic and data, we see the highest, the worst offenders are those that are between, they're underage drinkers and around up to the age of 28, 25 or so. That's why MAD has so many programs, so much education and awareness for youth and for parents, is because we realize that that's the cultural thing that's going on, is to target that. So in regards to supporting the minimum drinking age, is the fact that we aren't going to high schools and telling kids, hey, don't drive drunk, because they're not supposed to be drinking. What we're doing is trying to put like students against destructive decisions and support education, youth awareness. You know, what can you do to have fun? Changing that cultural, like, oh, fun and drinking are the same, doing it when you're young. Supporting legislation that makes it extremely disadvantageous, of course, for adults to provide alcohol to minors, for parents to serve alcohols at parties, for people to serve alcohols to minors. The more deterrence that we can have, the more we're hoping to change that societal, the worst offenders, basically.
Just on the policy issue of 21 drinking age, you know, I think that many of you notice that the United States is a prohibition-oriented society. So, you know, we've done it from prohibiting alcohol for all ages. Now it's under 21. You know, clearly there are people drinking under that age and doing it routinely. That the complication from the motor vehicle safety side is that these people are both new to drinking, oftentimes, and they're new to driving, and they're the least experienced drivers with the least ability, so that even modest impairment of their already lousy driving is a big deal. And so they also, one of the things we see with young people is they have poor impulse control, because they haven't learned yet the consequences of doing stupid things. You know, the first time you drive your beautiful new car into a wall because you're drunk helps you gain control of your impulses, you know, and so it works. You know, the data supports that this is policy that has prevented a lot of fatalities. Is it necessarily the wisest policy? We don't know, but it's working. And so Australia, I think that their general deterrence may be working with their teenagers as well and their young people. You know, certainly in the EU, people drink at ages younger than the United States. The EU also has a far lower threshold for drunk driving. It's considered, I think, 0.05. Most people at 0.05 would be thought to be sober in the United States. And when we talk about drunk, that's not very precise. Really, you start to think of a person as being drunk and showing, you know, most people would say, well, that person looks like they might be drunk, when they're at about 0.17, which is like twice the level of what clearly, by the science that was shown, impairs your driving. So most people who are impaired and shouldn't be driving by law don't look drunk.
I got two hands in the back. Maybe we'll finish up with those three hands quickly. And so I'm just going to go 1, 2, 3. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, and then we'll have to wrap up. Yeah, it sounds logical, but unfortunately, I mean, I don't know. The data on that would be kind of, I mean, hard to know. I mean, when the drinking age was 18, and you know, there were lots of fatalities of teenagers, 18, 19, and then the drinking age got put to 21. It did lower the rates of teen drunk driving and crashes. I mean, it is effective. You know, whether you like it or, I mean, whether it's, you know, a free and reasonable thing for that age group or not, it does work. Well, in the interest of time, maybe we'll just hear the other two questions and then we can wrap up. Social services.
Mm-hmm. You know, I think one of the issues with alcohol is, for many people, alcoholism is a disease. They're actually ill. And so, you know, there's some people who are simply drinking recreationally, can choose to drink or not. There are other people who are addicted to alcohol and are going to drink. And so, to me, if you're going to respond to this program intelligently, you have to deal with that population. Is often the most serious offenders, the most frequent offenders. What you said, your murder in your case killed.
Point.
So that's a very high blood level and multiple arrests already. Clearly, this person is, you know, a repeat criminal, but also is likely an addicted out. You know, and to me, that you're talking there probably not only prison, but really needing to get that person into treatment and clinically deal with their alcohol, and the problem is frequently by the time they fall into the criminal justice system, they have a lifetime of alcoholism, habits that are entrenched, very difficult to deal with it, and oftentimes they're failing in all phases of their life also because of their alcoholism, and so it's very difficult to deal with people like that.
I'm going to say, I really thank you for your question, because I would love it to, instead of there just being harsher punishments, is to figure out what is the most way that we can prevent this in the first place. I mean, it doesn't make me feel good that there is a young man who can't support his family and his 6-year-old son who is paying the price for my sister's death for 42 years in prison. It doesn't make me feel good, but I'm glad that he's off the road. Do I wish that he had gotten treatment? I would prefer that. You know what I mean? So that's the kind of question that I would like to be asking, is how can we involve other people to help the people that are, do you know, Amy, is it a third of the drunk drivers on the road are repeat offenders? Is that the statistic, that most of them, yeah. I'm pretty sure that that's the statistic, though, is that the people that make up the most impact for this crime are people that are repeat offenders and actually sick. So.
The NHTSA statistics on it is that the average drunk driver has driven 82 times drunk before they're arrested the first time.
All right, so I think we have one last question, and we're going to wrap up. John lives in Yakima, so.
Well, I live in eastern Washington, but I also manage the safety programs for Montana and Idaho and Alaska, and there's probably no place more rural than Alaska. And the answer is there isn't anything. Very, very few things that would even begin to help out. You get drunk and you drive home.
Are cell phones the new alcohol? Talking about particularly
Texting.
Cell phones do increase your risk of driving. If you're talking, if you're texting, that's just nuts, But if you're talking, that does increase your risk. And oddly enough, hands-free also, it's not as bad as holding the phone, but a hands-free distracts you from driving. So just avoid cell phone use. And it increases risk, but thus far, it has not reached the same population risk, as drunk driving. Drunk driving is still the reigning champ for road traffic risk. Well, I just want to thank our speakers very much for coming, and I want to just leave people with the thought that injuries aren't accidents. There's so much that can be done to prevent them. We didn't hear. We had a great talk about industrial and occupational safety, and we haven't covered that much in the questions and the discussion. But that's a whole other branch of the injury picture, especially in low and middle income countries. The clothes that most of us buy, the shoes made in factories with far less than acceptable safety standards by U.S. standards around the world. There's a whole other set of issues crying out for attention. So all those things that I showed: road safety, fires, falls, industrial safety. All are just, there's so many solutions crying out for attention, and so much of that involves the legal framework and policies and enforcement of laws. And I want to finish with a special thanks for Kristen to coming and telling her story, which I'm sure is very hard to do. And this points out the very important role that civil society has, as John mentioned, Mothers Against Drunk Driving, sitting in courtrooms, forcing judges and police, forcing legislatures to make changes. Whether for drunk driving or for any form of safety, the lay public, civil society has so much of a big role to play. And I work in road safety and injury prevention in about 5 countries: Ghana, Vietnam, India, Mexico, well, those 4, and in the United States, 5. And it just, the role of civil society has barely been tapped. I don't know of a group like MAD in any countries that I work in, Asia, Latin America, or Africa. And it's just, I think MAD ought to expand globally, and those of you that are based in other countries, a key way to promote the policy changes that are needed, whether for drunk driving, road safety, or industrial safety, or any form of injury prevention, is through citizen empowerment and citizen advocacy, and I highly recommend it to you. So, Yeah. Yes, and yes. All right. Thank you very much for your attention.
That was a great discussion.
Sit and they see both like yeah, drunk driving really horrible. Stopping me and get beat on a checkpoint. All right, so next. Thank you very much. Yeah, hey, how are you? Hey, so I see you working at ISP.
Yes,
Is that
yes.
a full-time job? Or
Yeah. I just started as, well, I've been working there for 4 years, but I started a new job.
It's I think the cultural relationship with alcohol is so complex. I mean, it's really, like, if you look at different European countries, like, in drinking age, I don't think is it. I think it's our group. And the youth, we're not even, yeah.
For the most part. So, Brittany? Oh, yeah. Okay. I told her.
Pretty works.
That's it. Okay, great. Awesome. Well, I hope I don't have any power to.
No, but I mean, so we're gonna, if somebody, if it's going from person to person, and at least it's heading towards the right person, I'm hoping that's fine. There's actually a surgery resident who's working with me.
And you're looking.
Yeah, Taylor's just moved here.
Yeah, I know. But he's not here this week because he's in.
Oh yeah, they're fighting the WHO. No.
That's quite a.
Yeah. Oh, so they summarize it for me.
Basically.
I know WHO's controversy is they weren't involved in that.
Not like giving. There's all kinds of debate.
Like the GVD people wanted co-authors, so they asked me to be a co-author, and I said no first, and Kaji was kind of like, but you've done more than most of the co-authors, so can't be add you. I made sure that they included my colleagues on a little bit run. Yeah. So I think in essence,
I think that it's just a, like, well, I guess the thing is that,
well, there you go. So, people work on that. It's like we've got this data for women's use.
I know exactly. That's the thing. And then, I mean, just the fact that the copyright is cities. Anyway, that's the biggest controversy. Hey, good. How are you? I hope it advances. I'm excited about it. Oh, I know. I can imagine. What's motivating? My boss is William Heisel now. He's the director of communication.
A step or two, but
So he's mostly right about film. Oh, yeah. I did last week when I was in DC. Right, when I was in, and now this is my next basically ever. Had it out. The more prepared you are, the better.
Yeah. No.
Yeah.
The better it works. The less likely it is to.
Yeah.